don't know me, I'm working with MSF since 16 years, the last 3 years on the international board. And I'm pleased to be the member of the international board who is connected with the MSF Italy Association. I have to apologize that I'm not there in person with you today as you're having this important discussion and reflection about the movement and where we're going with these roadmap processes. So, but I am pleased to join you virtually, and I will try my best in the next few minutes to give a bit of explanation about the roadmaps, the associative and the executive ones, to explain where they are at present and what is likely to happen with them as they evolve in the coming months. I want to also to try and explain a little bit about how these roadmaps link with the ideas of MSF development as a structure, also about the future mission and mandate of MSF, and to speak a little bit about how we see in this process the discussions around the roles of the partner sections, such as MSF Italy, both as an executive dimension and on the associative dimension. I'll try not to speak too long, otherwise it's going to get a bit boring for everyone, but I think it's a good chance to try and give a bit of a explanation to you, even if it's less perfect than being there in person. So, about the roadmaps. At the IGA in 2013, there were two roadmaps approved by the Assembly. One to look at MSF executive development and one to look at the associative development. Now this vote or discussion was preceded by earlier work attempted by the International Board to create a vision for MSF in the future. That's one of the tasks which is written into the statutes of the International Board, is to try to create a vision and then to steer the implementation of that vision. Now this did not come out of the sky, and many of the issues about and this idea of trying to develop a plan for MSF's future have been identified and discussed by many years. Just to highlight a couple of the key points in that process evolving, there was a very important paper written by Morten Rostock, the previous international president, I think over 12 years ago now, in which he identified the unhealthy growth that was taking place within MSF. When we had the La Mancha conference, some of these same issues were identified and partly considered in that process. There were other key moments too, to highlight a number of them. There was a paper written by the then International Secretary and International President, Christopher Stokes and Christophe Fernier, entitled Will the Elephant Still Dance in 2020? In which they tried to imagine being in 2020 and what might MSF look like, what might some of the changes that have taken place, and they intended this to provoke a discussion and reflection. That was in 2007. Then we had the Barcelona conference in 2010, where again we were reflecting about some of the constraints identified in the development of MSF and where we might go. So I want to just set the scene a little bit, that this discussion and debate about the future of MSF has been explored many times. It's not always been successful. It's very frequently been frustrating. And it indicates that, yes, there is a challenge with many different people having different perspectives as to how and what process we should attempt. Now, in the 2013 IGA, the motions instructed the International Board to develop roadmaps for associative growth and separately on executive growth. The executive process was to look at, among other things, the scenarios of the number of OCs, operating centers, and the location of those operating centers, including the option to consider what might an OC in Africa look like. We were instructed to form a small working group of associative and executive members, and excuse me, to prepared terms of reference to define what exactly we would look at. That terms of reference was never created. There was a challenge even in that to decide what should we focus on and what process should be followed. Instead, we tried to move forward as best we could. We thought we might first try to understand some of those issues, and from then we might be able to develop a clearer terms of reference. That process commenced in January 2014 when there was a retreat in Barcelona, which included, I think, 9 associative and executive members. And over the course of 2 days, we were quite successful in identifying some of the various features which need to be considered as part of MSF's executive development. And some of you may well have seen the report which came out of that, which was widely circulated around the movement. Now, subsequent to that retreat, there was a challenge how to take this forward. We wanted to take those different features and start to look at scenarios, try to examine what would be the advantages and disadvantages, and then start to make some decisions. Now, the process then got bogged down. We struggled to maintain the level of participation from some members of the executive who, despite making some commitments to participate, found that that was not possible. I think some of them were not entirely convinced this was the best way forward. Others became too busy and consumed with the very heavy response that MSF as a movement has been undertaking in recent months to various crises, notably Ebola. On the associative roadmap side, there was perhaps a greater level of participation and purposeful progress. That group, which has been steered by my colleague on the international board, Rachel Kittle-Monroe, has been looking to shape and to develop some of the pillars for associative life. And some of the progress of that was shared at this year's IGA in Athens in June. And they've made some progress towards identifying and describing and defining what might be put in place for MSF to decide what is meant by inclusive and participatory membership, what is meant by operational connectedness from an association, and what should be the added value that should come from associative life within MSF. Nonetheless, despite some progress in creating a theoretical model of those associative elements, the process has not got to a stage where you can actually benchmark the performance of certain associations in a real way. So it becomes hard to link those principles to some of the choices we must face, such as how many associations we should have and how they should be organized. Some of you will be aware of the discussions which have taken place in the International Board, in which the board has expressed its concern that we should be conscious to avoid becoming too heavy. We do not seek to become a United Nations of MSF because we fear that having too many entities, we lose our ability to reach decisions in an efficient manner. So in the past 2 months, there's been quite some reflection amongst members of the International Board. We're having to reassess where we are in the development of these 2 roadmaps. We also have to face an unfortunate conclusion that neither of the 2 processes are making progress in the manner in which we'd like. After some serious reflection, we are having to make some conclusions and some decisions how we would reorientate these 2 roadmaps. We have sought, and this is perhaps an oversight we should have recognized from the beginning, we are now seeking and we have gained expert advice on this. We have there is a fellow called Henry Zinglerson who has volunteered. He is a very experienced management consultant who has worked with many quite prestigious leading corporations around the world, leading strategic planning, strategic alignment, and organizational redesign processes. And he is now volunteering his time to help MSF in the development of these roadmaps. And he's working pro bono on an entirely voluntary basis. So it has been useful actually to have someone who knows what they're talking about join our kind of amateur efforts and help us really identify what things we should be concerned about and help us, based on his experience in guiding similar processes in other organizations, both commercial and other non-profit organizations, how we might go about it. We've also challenged ourselves internally and have let ourselves be challenged by others in the movement through discussion at the core XCOM platform and at the full XCOM platform, which I joined last month. And out of these reflections, we have a number of conclusions to offer. We consider that in hindsight, the development of these two roadmaps should have been given greater resources. We have gone about it in a very light manner, and we have failed to comprehend that this type of exercise needs a lot more expert input, but it also needs a lot more time and attention than we had foreseen. We also recognize that we have been weak in clearly defining what should be the aims and activities to be undertaken. And we've been weak in our management and weak in holding people accountable to the commitments they made to participate in. We also have to flag that the terminology that we've used in this process has been helpful in some ways, but a hindrance in others. When we're talking about developing a roadmap, that needs to be understood as both a goal. We need to have a destination for that roadmap, and it also needs to be understood as a process. If we do not have a goal, then the process ends up just looking at efficiencies. And whilst looking at efficiencies is important, it's not the only aspect. And some of the efficiency gains can be better examined, more appropriately examined by other levels of the movement. We also consider that in hindsight, we need to have both these associative and executive processes joined together. The initial decision to have two processes running in parallel has not worked out well, and we're now considering that they should be aligned together into a single process to ensure that these are mutually complementary. In terms of an overarching goal for this exercise, we see that we want to create a single roadmap which will guide the purposeful development of both MSF associative and executive. And the purpose of this development is to optimally achieve MSF's assistance to populations in crisis. So it's around that aim. It's not around an internal objective. It's to help us actually serve the populations we seek to assist. We also want to present these roadmaps as a complementary effort. It has to be owned and grounded in both the executive and the associative. We see that the executive is primarily responsible to address the current challenges in our operations. And so the roadmap has to be grounded in the now. It has to make real sense now. We also see that the associative, through the International Board, is responsible to look at the challenges that MSF is likely to face in the future. Now, what we're hoping to do after this process of reflection over the past 2 months, which culminated last week in our International Board meeting in Paris, we have some ideas how we can move the thing forward. We want the roadmap to be relevant to MSF's development in the near future, that is, in the next 1 to 5 years, which includes some of the discussion and relevancy of the process being undertaken to develop RSA3. We also want this process to be relevant in the medium and long term of MSF. And when we're talking about long term in MSF, to be very clear, we're talking about up to 10 years. We're not talking in the far, far distant future, but we are talking of a time horizon up to 10 years. We're looking to see, can we now guide this process through 3 phases and to follow a methodology which is being used by management consultants to guide similar processes in commercial and also non-for-profit organizations. So we are trying to base what we undertake now to follow similar processes that are recognized globally. We first want to conduct what is being called an environmental scan. We want to see what are some of the medical and humanitarian needs that MSF has to address. And we're trying to make some estimation and prediction on what some of those are likely to be in this time horizon that we're talking about. So these needs, once we have some estimation of them, will be the basis of why we want to undertake this exercise. It's to address those needs. We then want to examine what should we be doing? What are the operations that we need to be performing, and what are the priorities that we're going to set, and which roles should MSF be performing towards those identified needs, where we can see that we have a distinct added value. For we might consider that we can address many needs, but when we go through this stage of the exercise, we're really wanting to set out some choices for ourselves. Which needs do we think we can address better, and which do we have to look at and say, well, maybe others are better placed or in a better position to look after. Only after that do we want to look at the how, which is looking at how we want to change elements of our structure, the number of entities we have, the number of decision-making platforms we have, the kind of processes we have to look at information, process information, and reach decisions. And one of the problems we've faced in developing these roadmaps up to now is that we've too often got ourselves bogged down into looking at the how first, without first identifying ourselves what actually it is that we want to achieve. We've been developing roadmaps without having a destination in mind. So this is the process in which we're now trying to follow. It's a much more disciplined, objective process. It's a process which is based upon what other industries and organizations are using in terms of developing a strategic plan for their future. And it is a bit unfortunate that now, quite some time after these motions were decided in the 2013 IGA, that we're having to face some of these realities and essentially having to reboot the process. Yet I don't think that what we've done till now is entirely wasted. There is a lot of benefit out of it. We're now much better informed. We have a much greater appreciation on both the executive and the associative side as to how to proceed in the future. And I think we should have more confidence that we're going to reach this target of having a roadmap than when we set out 18 months ago. One thing to flag is the time frame. In those motions which were voted in the 2013 IGA, there was the intention that we would deliver these roadmaps in time for the 2015 IGA. Now, that target date is now highly unlikely, and we're likely to face 2016 is possibly a much more realistic time frame to think of. The second thing I wanted to talk about was about MSF as a structure. What are some of the structural aspects that we need to consider? As I said, we need to have a goal for these roadmaps. We need to set ourselves and try to define what are the medical humanitarian goals which we seek to address, both in the near future and in the more medium and longer term future up to 10 years. Only when we have that can we start seriously considering what changes to our structure and processes are relevant. So in terms of thinking about our structure, it's good to reflect on a number of things. We have quite a number of people in our senior positions in MSF have been with MSF for a long time. We have old generals, and how the saying says about old generals is they tend to fight old wars. So we do need to challenge ourselves to see what changes to processes might be relevant. We have been amazingly successful in MSF in improving, being able to adapt to new situations. But we should also be critical. As Christopher Stokes has remarked, MSF has too many layers and too many players. And if we have that, is that undermining our ability to be adaptive? We can also look at the situation of Ebola currently. I think I'm astounded by what we are able to accomplish for Ebola. But I'm also recognizing that this response presents questions to it. Are we necessarily responding to it in the most optimal way? One of the questions about structure that we have talked about in both the IB and at the retreat on executive development is this question of an OC in Africa. That has captured the imagination of many people in the movement. It feeds with this idea that MSF should be less Western in character, and that we may have some special advantages coming out of that in terms of our ability of being able to access certain populations, especially in conflicts where our Western identity may indeed be a major liability. Now, as expressed in the minutes of the retreat notes, sorry, I'm just going to have to stop here, Fabio. Hold on a second. Sorry. Hello, Fabio.
Okay. Yeah. So we can go again. We can start again.
Hello, sorry, I got distracted. I have my dog barking in the background there. Is it possible to go backtrack a little bit in the recording and to start talk again about the
Yeah.
OC in Africa? Okay, I don't know. Is that convenient for you that you're able to cut a little bit in the recording?
Yeah, yeah, I will do. I will do.
Okay,
Don't worry. So
okay, thank
you
you.
can start again.
Okay, so one of the topics to talk about is about this question of an OC in Africa. This question has captured the imagination of many people in the movement, with the idea that an OC in Africa could be an important statement by MSF, and part of a process in which MSF should be considering to de-Westernize itself, and that some of the advantages which might come from that is to improve our ability to engage in different crises, especially those crises which are in conflict countries where a Western or a predominantly Western identity of MSF is something of a liability and which can limit the potential for us to access certain populations. Now, that remains a key question still to be examined in the roadmap process. We have addressed it to some degree. It was examined and debated at the retreat earlier this year, in which we identified also some key criteria that might need to be examined with regards to an OC in Africa. And in considering points of whether an OC in Africa, what would be required for it to function well, and particularly some of the points around whether where we wish to locate an OC, is it necessary that that is in a society which permits and enables a freedom of expression and independence of decision making. And there is a question whether in some countries in Africa or indeed other parts of the globe, if the form of government which is present in some of those countries would be conducive to permitting a strongly independent MSF entity having responsibilities of operations to thrive. There's no decision about it, but I think it is an interesting aspect to consider if we are willing to have OCs located outside of Europe. What we need to be quite critical and examine what would be some of the advantages to come from it, and what might indeed be some of the disadvantages. And with this larger question of number of OCs and the location of those OCs, we have to also to consider what is our vision in the future of these OCs. Are they to be more autonomous than currently, or is our vision in the future that they are more integrated in terms of having a more coherent central platform of management or not? So those points to be explored. The mandate for the future is another thing I wish to briefly describe, and one which I think, excuse me, especially relevant now, given that MSF's profile in the world in response to the Ebola epidemic has altered quite substantially. We have to see whether is this a temporary exposure of MSF and in a much higher profile way than we've experienced previously. Is it a temporary thing, or is it something that we should be challenging ourselves to build upon? Given that we have, in response to Ebola, we have had a very prominent position in the world media. We've had a very prominent position politically in being able to influence and to gain the ability to talk and present perspectives to governments, to presidents, to the UN Assembly, etc. Is this something that we should be trying to build upon, especially in recognition that there is something of a failure and a weakness for some of this role to be performed? Failure on the part of WHO, failure on the part of various actors to meet health needs in some places where the health system is simply not adequate, has not been developed in a manner that's going to address the needs which are present. Around this question of mandate, some people are querying whether MSF should be ready to mature itself, to let go some of our earlier conceptions of ourselves as being the radical outsider, someone who's not part of the system. And yet, in some ways, we should be challenge ourselves to recognize that, in a sense, we are not outside the system, with some observers saying that we're not only part of the system, but we're a substantial part of the system. In that our place in the provision of emergency healthcare is unchallenged. There is no one else that is coming with anything like the volume or scope of activities in response of emergency medical needs in crisis as does MSF. So should we already recognize that we are, in a sense, a humanitarian superpower? And should we be building on that or developing with that outlook? And we need to try and narrow down some of these different and not always compatible ideas around our mandate. Because unless we are able to make some choices and some decisions about that, we are going to struggle to make choices around our organization in terms of what we need for the structure and processes to sustain and to develop ourselves in reaching that mandate. Talking briefly about what all of these processes might mean in terms of the partner sections, such as MSF Italy and others. It still is premature to judge what this vision might be, to set out. It's too early for me to say, or for anyone in MSF, I think, to say this is what MSF aspires to be in 10 years' time. Yet some things are a little bit helpful in considering what it might look like. Given the changes that we see in the world 2014, we have a multitude of large-scale crises. And unlike the kind of crisis which was experienced a year ago in the Philippines, which was a terrible natural disaster, some of the crises which are now present, such as for Iraq, Syria, Central African Republic, South Sudan, indeed also for Ebola, these are not crises which are likely to disappear soon. They're likely to evolve, to change, but to be there for many years. And we can expect that there is an increased climate of political instability. So there's likely to be more such emergencies, which have a conflict dimension to them. And from that, we can see that the role of MSF, the character of MSF as a dunantist, a principled humanitarian actor, is likely to remain as being part of our key added value in the delivery of humanitarian assistance. So that those two parts, kind of the relevance to be acting in emergencies and the relevance to maintain and to develop this dunantist approach, are likely to be key foundation blocks in building this mandate or future vision of what MSF should be addressing in the future. Now, behind that bigger overarching vision is well, what does this mean for on the associative and executive side? On the associative, my own opinion, my own kind of hopes are that associations will look increasingly to try and form links, particularly the multitude of associations we have in Europe. It will be interesting to see can some of them explore connections with each other to form some kind of regional approach. I don't think it would be right to prescribe what that should be in terms of how many associations we should have, but I think it will be interesting to try and see can we limit to some extent the total number of associations, but also to see can those associations which are going to be there in the future, can they develop their role? Can they be more challenging? Some people in MSF have observed that it's often a struggle within associations, given the demands which is there to steer an association. Even if there is a vibrant or large membership, will there necessarily be a sufficient number of people that will present themselves with the skills and qualities to form a board, to act in the key role of presidents and IGA representatives? So here is where there may actually be an opportunity to look constructively at the idea of merging, which has been actually the rationale that's being followed by MSF Nordic, by the associations in Norway and Sweden in exploring a combination. Well, we need this association to be challenging. We need these two parts. In one of our discussions at the international board, Mego, the president of MSF France, made the interesting comparison of the associative and executive as the yin and the yang. It's like how he describes it is the hydrogen and the oxygen. And it's only when you put those two elements together do you get the very interesting and useful substance of water. But water cannot exist by one of those elements alone. It has to be in combination. And likewise, he sees the relationship between the associative and the executive sides. It needs to be real, it needs to be meaningful, and I think it's also important for it to be challenging. And that's a key part in, I think, how we in the international board have been thinking about how we want the associative to be functioning in the future, is to challenge. Earlier this year, we set out an interesting question to the rest of the humanitarian community of where is everyone? And whilst that is interesting and provocative, we similarly have to ask ourselves the question. For currently, we are not in Somalia. We might be able to revisit the opportunities there in the near future, but we're not there presently. Nor are we in North Korea, and nor are we in parts of Iraq and Syria where some of the most in need populations are living. So we need that challenge also within MSF to challenge ourselves as to, can we explore new ways of working, new opportunities, and to move beyond just what we have been in the past. On the executive side, what might this mean in terms of future development for MSF Italy or partner sections? Again, we have to first clarify what is it that we see of MSF in the future. What is our role going to be? But I think some things we can probably think more about in that I think the OCs are the vehicle in which we reach patients. So I think there's still quite some work to do to clarify the links which exist currently between partner sections and the OCs. There's been a lot of development on that in recent years, but that still needs to be built upon. For currently, there are many executive offices which are still uncertain as to how they see their future evolving in the coming years, especially some of the new entities which have come on board. They're anxious to see what is their place going to be in the MSF of 2020 or 2025. So we need to try and define what will be some of those relationships, which part those partner sections will play, and what will be their responsibilities on their side and on the part of the OC towards them. So some of that relationship has to be clarified. And I think it should not be approached with kind of necessarily a fearful outlook. I think if we would make the OCs more of a hierarchical body over the sections, it might be that that's actually an empowering relationship, one in which we make clear those relationships, and it might help actually, because currently we have quite an effort, it seems, in terms of transactional costs of people discussing and rediscussing and constantly requalifying what are the boundaries, what is the framework of that relationship. And I think it may also permit us to have the executive, and particularly the OCs undertaking operations, to become more adaptive. Currently, some of the executive is consumed with the internal machinery, what Christopher Stokes, as I said earlier, refers to as too many layers and too many players. If we can clarify some of that, we may actually free ourselves to be more reactive and more dynamic. I don't know to what extent all of this fits with some of your ideas. I'm also sorry to talk too long. And I'm sorry as well that it's an imperfect way of engaging with you, in that there's not an immediate opportunity now for you to present your feedback. I will share with Fabio, the coordinator, my email and my Skype address, and I will certainly welcome any questions that any of you may have as a result of this, or of other information that you've heard about the roadmap processes. There's certainly work for us to do in the IB to steer this forward. Some of the work which has gone on till now has been frustrating. It has not gone in the right way. I am hopeful that we may now be on a better track. I'm hopeful that the terms of reference, which we have been working hard on and are now to try and clarify and set down on paper, I'm hoping that that can be shared with you in the near future. And yeah, I wish you well in your discussions in this weekend. I'm sorry I'm not there, and I look forward to continuing the contact in future. Thank you very much.